enemy here. So what we need to do is this enemy needs to spawn somewhere along the top. So let's go to our enemy prefab, add a component, we'll add in a new script, and the script will be called, for instance, enemy spawner. Now, should we add this to the enemy or should we add this to another place here? Well, it might make sense to add it to the enemy here, but what we can do is we can add it to the player because the player, oftentimes the player serves as the main place where you attach all your scripts. If you don't add in a player, add it to the player, you can add it into just an empty object and call it, game object scripts. But you do need to attach the script to something. So we are going to add this, but in this case, we're going to add it to the player. We'll call this enemy spawner. And what this will do is that this will add in the enemy spawner. So let's double click on this. And look at that. We have our enemy spawner here. I always like to delete these comments. And what we need to do is we need to add in a public game object, and this game object is going to be the enemy to spawn. All right, and what we'll also do is we'll add in a public bool. We'll call this can spawn, and we'll make that equal to true. So we're going to start off with the enemies being able to spawn. Now the reason why we need this boolean is because if this boolean is false, we'll stop this enemy. So let's say you want to have a game with maybe like 5 different kinds of enemies. What you need to do is you need to, for instance, go and add in this. You need to add in this so that you could add in as many and change and check to see which enemy you're going to spawn. So let's add in a public float, and we'll call this enemy spawn time, make that equal to 1.0f, and we're going to say public float, and we'll say this is max x, and where we're going to spawn this, if we go back into Unity here, we're going to spawn this somewhere up top here. So if we look at this, we're going to say that it's going to be, again, probably between somewhere like 28 and 28, and the y here is probably going to be about 20. So somewhere we need to kind of tell the computer where to spawn this. So we're going to spawn it between negative 28 and 28, and then roughly around 20. So let's go back into MonoDevelop here. So let's say this is going to be, well, 28.0f. That's probably good. All right. Let's add in the public float, and we'll call this starting y, and we'll make that equal to 20.0f. Now you can make it whatever you want here. Now, again, the reason why we're doing this is so that we can change it over time. And it's always good to format so you have all your public bools in a spot, floats, etc. Okay, and then what we're going to add in is we're just going to add in a float. We'll call this random x, and the reason why we need to make it a random is because we're going to randomize the x. And remember, x is across here, so we're going to put it somewhere along the x-axis, and again, it's across here, so we're going to spawn it randomly there. All right, so what we need to do is we need to add in another IE numerator. Right, and we're going to call this spawn enemy timer, and we'll add in a few items here. Okay, well, let's add in this yield return new, and then we're going to say wait for seconds, and the seconds, of course, will be enemy spawn time. We already have a variable up for that here. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to add in a void spawn enemy, right? And then let's spawn the enemy right here so that we can kind of see it. So we got spawn enemy, and we have this yield return new here. Now let's go and let's make this random here. So remember, we have random x. Okay, we're going to set this to a random number, and what that will be is that will be random dot range. Okay? And you're going to say float min and float max. Well, we already have a variable for that. So let's say we wanted to put it in between negative 28 and 28. Well, that's what we would write. But if you remember, we do have a max x and a max x again. And remember, we are making it between negative max x and regular max x. Then we're going to instantiate. Okay, and we're going to instantiate, and we want the third one, remember. So what we're going to do is we're going to say enemy to spawn. We're going to say that this is a new vector 3. You need to add in the new vector 3 part here. And vector 3 requires 3 items here. We're going to go to random x. We're going to go to starting y. And then we're just going to say 0 because the z-axis is not important in this case. And then lastly, we need to go to quaternion.identity. All right. Whoa, what just happened here? Well, let me explain this. So we got our instantiate, we have enemy to spawn, and then we have to add in a new position. Okay, we need the object, the position, and then technically the rotation. So the vector 3, if you don't add in this new vector to this before this vector 3, it won't work. So we're giving it the random x. So every time we spawn the enemy, we're going to set the random x range. We're going to automatically set it to the starting y, okay, which we did set up here. So it's always going to start there. And again, the z-axis is, in this case, not important. So there we go. We have a new vector 3 here, and that's going to spawn the enemy here, okay? Now, this would work, except there's a huge problem. The problem is that the enemy doesn't move down. So let's go back into Unity here. Let's go to our prefab enemy, and this time we will attach it to this item here. So let's add a component, we'll add in a script, and we'll call this move transform down. That way we can move it across here, and we can always double click this move transform down. It'll open it up. I like to delete all of these items here. You don't have to. You don't have to delete those comments. I like to, personally here. Actually, before we even move on to that here, there's one thing that we need to do. In this start coroutine, we need to in the start here we need to start coroutine. And which coroutine is that going to be? Enemy timer. Okay, and it should be spawn enemy timer. Make sure your brackets are correct. If you don't do that, it will not work. You do not add this to the update, by the way, just to let you know that. Okay, let's go back to our move transform down, and we'll start off with our public variable. We'll say public float, and this public float is going to be enemy speed is equal to 0.1f. Okay, so we got our 0.1f, and we're going to add in another void. We'll say move to bottom. And we'll go to transform.translate, and we're going to say this is 0. We're going to say negative, and we'll say, instead of enemy, we'll call this transform speed. That makes a little bit more sense. Transform speed, negative, of course, along the y-axis. Remember, y is up and down. And we need to call this here. We'll say move to bottom. Okay. All right. So let's go back into Unity here, and let's take a look at this. So let's go to our player here, And you can see how there's this enemy to spawn. Well, right now it's set to none. So what we need to do is drag in our prefab there. But what we also need to do is we need to go into our IE numerator here. And we have to add in a while loop. And we'll say while, and we'll say can spawn is double equal to true. So remember, if can spawn is equal to false, this won't work. Okay? Let's go ahead and let's save that here. Let's go back into Unity. And this should probably work here. So what's going to happen is when we run this, it's going to go and start here. So there we go. Everything's working out here. And look at that. We have all of these blocks coming down, and it's up to you to go and take a look at that and destroy them. But here's the problem. These items here are not destroyable because we don't have any collisions on them yet. Okay, so first things first is let's deal with the problem of the enemy and the projectile colliding with one another. So it's pretty simple. And we need to, and I'm going to select both of these prefabs here, and we're going to add in a component, okay? And we're going to add in a box collider 2D, right? And we'll add in another component, and we're going to add in a rigid body 2D. Now, both of these two items are here, but here's the thing. With the gravity scale, we're going to make it 0. We do not want to add gravity to this. All right, we need to add in these two items here in order to make it work here. So what we'll do is we'll say, for instance, destroy the transform here. So let's go ahead and let's take a look at, if we look at the projectile here, we have our projectile logic, and we could in theory add this in here. And if we look at the enemy prefab, we could add this in here. So what we're going to do is we're going to add a component, and we're going to add in a script. And that script is going to be destroy transform. All right? And we'll just call it destroy transform like this. Go ahead and let's add that in here. Looking pretty good. Let's add in this destroy transform. And it's looking good so far. I delete the comments as usual. And what we're going to do is we're going to add in a void here called on collision enter. And you have to make sure that on collision enter 2D capitalization is super important. Okay, on collision enter 2D, and then we're going to add in a bracket, and within these brackets we're going to have to add in a collision 2D. Okay, collision 2D colon, and we'll call this transform collision. Transform collision, just like that here. Now, what this does is that this is whenever there is a collision with the transform that this is attached to, this code is going to get run. Okay. Now, let's take a look at this here. We're going to add in an if statement. And in C#, I like to add in this if statement like this. I add in the brackets and curly brackets, etc. We're going to say transform collision. Okay. Now we could call it collision transform or transform collision, but either way, we're going to take this transform collision dot game object. Okay. And we're going to say, and you can see here that we have this void on enter, and it does have a bit of an issue here. And the reason is that there needs to be no colon there. Dot, we're going to say game object, and we're going to say dot tag is double equal to, and we're just going to type in the word collision, just like that. Now I'm going to copy this to the clipboard. Okay. Very important. Now we need to go and manually set up this tag. So let's go to our prefab enemy and let's go all the way up top here. We see where it says untagged or tag untagged right here. We're going to add a tag. And what tag is that going to be? We're going to click the plus sign and then I'm going to literally paste it in here. Why did I copy and paste? Well, it's actually quite simple. Very, very easy to mistype a word. There could be a typo or anything like that. So copying and pasting it makes it work well. All right. Then what we need to do is let's go back to our enemy prefab. And this is the step I pretty much always forget. So we need to literally put this tag into collision here. All right. And if you want to, you can add in that tag to be something a little bit more specific like collision enemy. But for now, collision is good because we are making this destroy transform to be as modular as possible. So that way you can add this into a new game and collision will work here. So what are we going to do? We're going to destroy. We are going to destroy the transform collision dot game object. So we're going to destroy that, and that's essentially what's going to happen here. So if the tag is colliding with that here, it's going to go and add in the transform collision here. So let's save it and hop back into Unity, and let's take a look at this. Before we continue, you can see we have this destroy transform here. What we need to do is we need to drag this over to the projectile here. Now what's interesting about this is that we now have a script that works on two different levels here. So if we look at this here, what's going to happen is we're going to, you can see that it gets destroyed, okay, and then it works kind of like that here. Now we'll take a look at that here, and there we go. That does indeed work. And if we really wanted to, we could copy the script and destroy the projectile as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy this here, and we have our destroy transform. And I'm going to right click, and you can actually go create here, and we'll add another C# script. We'll say destroy enemy. All right. And if you look at the prefab projectile here, it doesn't have a tag. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back into this destroy enemy and open it up. And I'm literally going to copy everything from destroy transform and copy and paste it in destroy enemy. And by the way, you can actually delete these two if you want. You don't actually have to keep these in here if you don't want to. But this one here we'll say is projectile. Okay, and you can see how modular this is. All right, and if I go ahead and save this here, we need to go back into Unity, and if we go to our prefab projectile, and what that's going to do is we need to go to tag, add tag, and then we're going to say this is projectile. Now just to be sure, you can always copy this, and you never lose points for just going back and making sure everything's correct. It actually saves you time in the long run. All right, so if we go back to MonoDevelop, save it, and go back into Unity and save it again here, you can see here that, well, this is looking pretty good. And what this needs to do here is, if we look at this, you know, we need to make sure that it has the projectile tag on it, okay? And I really wish you could set it in that other window, but we can't, so this is the way we do that here. So you can see here that for the most part, this prefab enemy, we have the destroy transform script. We need to add in this destroy enemy, to the prefab enemy, because we have both of these items on here. And you do need to kind of add that in here. Now, there we go, and there we go. You can see that both of them work out here. Now, what's interesting about this is that this destroy enemy, we should technically call it destroy projectile. Okay. Now, when you do this, you have to copy this and go back in here, and we'll stop it here, and change the name of this to destroy projectile. And that way, what it will do is it'll make sense here. So here we go. Now, there's a couple of things that is, well, a little bit kind of interesting with this project here. So I'm going to right click, and I'm going to go and create a folder. Okay, you can see that there's a folder all the way up at the top, and that folder is going to be called scripts. Okay, and I'm going to select all these. I'm pushing command, the Apple key on my Mac, and I believe it's the control key, and I'm just going to move all the scripts in here. Now that looks a lot better. Now what we really could do is we could add in, and I'm going to save it by the way, is if we really wanted to, we could create another folder called scenes, and we're going to move the game scene over, and then we're going to add in another folder. We're going to call this prefabs, and we're going to add in our two prefabs to our prefabs folder here, and we're going to add another folder. We'll call this sprites, and I'm just going to move in the rest of these here. Now, why did I do this? Well, organization is actually a productivity thing that you need to add to your project. I've had so many projects where my project has been so disorganized, it's either killed the project or delayed it quite a bit. So I highly recommend that you do that as well. Okay? Next thing we need to do is we need to add in a score. So let's go ahead and let's do that. It's pretty simple, but one thing we're going to do is we're going to go to 2D object. You can either do 2D object to create sprite, or you can just create an empty here. And what we're going to do is we're going to add in two things here. Okay, we're going to add in, we could add in, for example, the text here. We could add in, for example, the text, but what we need to do is add in a canvas to this first. Okay, now if you look at this canvas, okay, this white area, and I'm just going to zoom in. So you see this white box around everything? That is the canvas. Now let's go ahead and let's add in a text here. All right, and within this text you can add in something, and look at that. That looks pretty good. But there's a couple things that we need to do. We need to, first of all, kind of move this down and around, but let's take a look at this world space here. Okay, under the canvas, and we'll just zoom in, you have three options where it says world space. We're going to go to camera. Okay, and watch what happens when that happens. It gets to be really big. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to drag the camera. So I drag the main camera all the way in here. Okay, and look at that. Now if we run it, watch what happens. You can see that the text is no longer blurry. Okay, so if you were to run it before, and if you've ever tried this before, you see that it is kind of blurry. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to type in simply score. Okay, and make it equal to 0 for now. And as you can see, there's a whole bunch of different options here. What's really cool about this is that you can set the score wherever you want. So the top, you can either set it to the middle, the bottom, or left, right, and center. And by adding this in here to the top, I think it's actually pretty good. I'm going to make this a tad bit bigger though. Let's try 30. And let's see if that looks a little bit better. And I think that probably looks pretty good. All right, and yeah, that looks pretty good right there. Okay, so we now have the score here, and you can see that it works pretty well. Now the only thing is we need to add in the score logic, and in order to do that, we're going to add in another C# script, and we're going to call this script score logic. And the cool part about score logic is that it's going to allow us to, well, write the score. So I'm going to type in score logic. Okay. And what's even better about the score logic is we're going to be referencing this when we destroy the enemy here. So for instance, let's go to and let's actually drag this all the way into scripts here. So let's go into scripts, and we'll take a look at this we'll destroy this transform here. So let's open that here. And another thing I should mention is once you move the scripts within MonoDevelop, it actually goes away here. So what we need to do is we need to call, for example, we'll add in the name here. So you can see if I type in score logic, the name of it comes up here, and we'll call this add to score. Okay. And what we'll do is underneath the transform here, we'll say add to score is equal to get component, and we're going to say it's score logic. And within score logic, we're going to add in the two little brackets there. Okay. Now, let's go back into Unity for a second, and let's bring up score logic. And what we'll also do is we will add in a void here. So this void will be called, and it's not going to be a regular void, it's going to be a public void. We'll call this add to score void. All right. It has to be public because then we can go and access this. Okay. Let's save these both. And underneath this line, we're going to say add to score dot add to score void. And you can see, I'll zoom in so you can see it. It says that it's a public void. All right. So if we were to just go back to this for a second and take out the public, save it, of course, and if we were to kind of do this again and we did dot add to score, you can see it's no longer there. We have to add in that public in order to make it work. Okay, so we have our public void, and we're going to simply go to add to score void here. Okay, you do need the two brackets just like that.